What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 171 on this Thursday, May 1st. Welcome to May 2025. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a Thursday. We are recapping and closing the transfer portal on a Thursday. Collin can rest a little bit. The portal is closed. Oklahoma made a addition that they needed to make to their wide receiver room. Collin and I will, of course, recap that, break it down. And then we'll look at the cycle as a whole. Did Oklahoma do enough? Did they fill the needs that they needed to? We'll discuss. We'll kind of break it all down, all the different angles of it as the spring portal cycle has come to a close this week. And Collin, we'll get into all of that. But let's start, like I said, before we kind of recap the portal as a whole, let's start with the addition of the week, seemingly their last addition, you would think, of this cycle. In McNeese, wide receiver Jer'Michael Carter. Carter's obviously a guy that we've talked about a couple of times, comes over from McNeese. He had some other programs wooing him. We talked about Tennessee before. Baylor kind of got in the mix there. Vanderbilt was also hovering around here. Good size, 6'4", pretty productive last year at McNeese. We knew they really probably needed to and wanted to add a guy to that wide receiver room, and they did it this week with Jer'Michael Carter. Collin, you've been all over his recruitment. Talk about the player and just how Oklahoma made this happen and where you kind of see him fitting in to Emmett Jones' room here in this upcoming season.
Yeah, so let's start with how this happened, right? Because I think that's an important part of who the player is. And what I mean by that is this ended up being one of the more heated recruiting processes in the portal down the stretch in the spring. And you kind of get to the back end of it. He drops the top three. Mm-hmm. It was Oklahoma, Baylor, and Vanderbilt. That was pretty notable because Tennessee was supposed to get him on campus. He ended up canceling that visit to Knoxville and made it pretty apparent behind the scenes that a rescheduling was not on the table. And so you get into the final three. Oklahoma's feeling really good. But I had heard that not only did Arkansas pick up the phone and call his representation and the Razorbacks try to get into the mix a little bit late in the game, I had heard that Baylor actually had a pretty sizable number. And I'll talk about this more on the board today. I'll probably kind of do a behind-the-scenes recap of sorts, but I had heard at one point Baylor potentially had the largest offer on the table. And Jer'Michael Carter was battling whether or not to take an opportunity at a place like Baylor or Vanderbilt, because one thing that I had heard was some folks behind the scenes, I'm not saying Carter directly, but some folks behind the scenes were led to believe that he was trying to figure out whether just the sheer number of bodies in Oklahoma's receiver room was something to consider. And look, take for a second your feelings on the receiver room, whatever it may be, aside. When you just go through the depth chart, for lack of a better term, I mean, you're talking about what, 4 or 5 portal bodies, 2 more freshmen, plus guys like Zion Kearney, Ivan Carrion, Deion Burks, a lot of holdovers, like just the sheer numbers in that room, definitely something worth looking at. And so after a little bit of back and forth, I think Carter kind of came to the conclusion that he had the best time on his OU visit. I think Oklahoma, let's just say, elevated things, right? Like they made things a little bit more interesting. And in the end, this becomes a necessary partnership, right? Like you mentioned, they really wanted that as Oklahoma, another body in that room. And then kind of going off of that, like I see this as a very complimentary player. I watched the tape back again this morning to really kind of buckle down my feelings on Jer'Michael Carter. And for me, like, I see this as an ideal fit. Jer'Michael Carter, when you watch him, I think externally you look at him and you go 6'4", 192 pounds, always like this jumbo, deep downfield, jump ball, goal line threat type. And I don't think that's his game. I actually think that in a world where Giovanni Gibson, when healthy, is your vertical threat, Deion Burks is kind of your problem in the slot. Isaiah Satania can work outside or inside as maybe a layered player. Like I see Jer'Michael Carter, I call him a chain mover. I think he is sneakily effective over the middle of the field. I think he is very good against off coverage, zone coverage. He excels at making defenses pay in the soft spots of zone. He benefits a lot from free releases off the line, kind of gets a head of steam going, and then he just generates first downs. And there was a little bit more of first to second level stuff on his tape than I was expecting at 6'4", 192 pounds. And that's the other thing too, is it's like he's a little bit more slender than I think people realize, but he is very physical. Like, he embraces contact, and he's willing to go into the teeth of the defense. And so I view him as a very complementary skill set, the first down kind of guy, compared to a guy like Deion Burks who can make something happen, or a Giovanni Gibson, that vertical deep threat like I mentioned. It's a pretty stellar gap to fill relative to the player with Jer'Michael Carter. I just think he fits really seamlessly, especially when you consider kind of the other roles in that receiver room.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a really, just solid pickup, truthfully. They needed a guy here. They didn't need, it wasn't a dire need. It wasn't, we need a game changer in this room, but they needed a guy. And Jer'Michael Carter brings some size. We talked about that, last week. I mean, at 6'4", you have Jaden Gibson, who we don't know where he's at. Ivan Carry-On, who's going to year 2. And then Manny Choice is a freshman. I mean, that's the only guys that are comparable, at least in terms of, the height. For Jer'Michael Carter, Giovanni Gibson, we don't, we talked about this a little bit on Monday with Tom and James. It's like, Brent Venables says he's going to be back for the start of the season, but you're hopeful, but it's also like, okay, he had a serious injury. We'll see, can he make it back to camp? Is he going to really be like week 1 himself? That seems like you're asking a lot. So you need a guy there, and Deion Burks, while awesome player, and I think is clearly wide receiver 1 on this team, was hurt all last year. It was even banged up a little bit at the start of the spring. Now, he looked great at the combine. Like, I think he's healthy right now, but can you keep him that way? Certainly hope so. So just the more bodies, the better. I think they did a pretty good job in this portal cycle. There wasn't that slam dunk receiver like, oh, this guy's coming in, big name. That's not the approach they went. They didn't, that's not how they attacked this position. They went for, Jer'Michael Carter, Giovanni Gibson, Isaiah Satania, obviously Countez Lewis. We didn't get to see a lot in the spring. Even Josiah Martin, is kind of floating around. Like, they took this position that was just in shambles last year, and they were aggressive, and they added a lot of guys, which I think is what everyone wanted them to do, right? So they added a lot in the winter. They went through the spring, had a couple injuries, said, let's go ahead and get another one. And they went and they got another one here, Jer'Michael Carter, that isn't quite like the others in terms of, what he can kind of bring to the table. So, again, are you expecting him to come in and go for 1,000 yards this year? No, but he fits into the room. And I think he's a nice complementary piece to the other guys you have there. So I like the pickup. I think it gives you a little more depth in that room to feel good about it. And we'll see. I think it's still fair to kind of, question that room just because, again, Giovanni Gibson's hurt. Can you keep healthy? Because if Giovanni Gibson, let's say he's not, ready to start the year, or he's not quite himself yet, and then Burks gets banged up again, who are you turning to? Who are your top guys? Who are your go-to guys? That becomes a question pretty quick. So I still like the room. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of guys. But it's a lot of improving guys. So we'll see how it shakes out. But I like adding Carter to the mix. And if you told me Jer'Michael Carter plays gets 4 or 5 targets a game all season long, I could totally see that.
Yeah. Can I give you my loose, working, soft, whatever you want to say, player comparison here?
Sure.
Jer'Michael Carter. It's very specific, but it's like he kind of reminds me of back end of Oklahoma career Theo Weiss. Tall, slender, longer armed, kind of that first down chain mover type. Maybe not, again, the vertical burst or like the just 9-ball guy. But I think when you think back to what Theo Weiss kind of ended up becoming towards the back end of his college career in general, he was that taller, longer, first down type. And I see that in Jer'Michael Carter, and I think that the ultimate deciding factor for him, kind of what you're talking about, like it's still a receiver room to question. Like, I think on one hand, it's very fair to be excited about Jer'Michael Carter. If you're an OU fan out there that's kind of thrilled about this addition, yeah, like have some fun. It's football. It's supposed to be fun. This guy's it's a big get. But at the same time, I think if you're an Oklahoma fan and you're out there going, okay, like what can we really expect from this guy? I'm kind of with you in your line of thinking, like, hey, if he gets 2 or 3 targets to receptions, per outing, like that's at least a relative consistency level that they need. And I think for me, the number one question I'm going to have is, what does it look like for Jer'Michael Carter whenever he lines it up and there is an SEC caliber defender right in front of his face in press man coverage? I believe that that's going to ultimately decide what he provides to this offense. And hey, if he does well in that setting, huge, right? Like huge deal. Do think he has a little bit of juice off the line, but again, like I think he's a little bit more on the slimmer side than people are expecting. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Emmanuel Choice, like earlier in the career, Emmanuel Choice. Now, from what I hear, obviously I don't live in Norman, but from what I hear, Emmanuel Choice is just a big old dude.
He's a wagon. Yeah.
He's filling out a little bit, but Jer'Michael, yeah, man, like some of the stuff that Jer'Michael Carter did underneath, like I think that this guy, if he can again kind of translate to some things that he didn't necessarily see at the FCS level or whatever, that's a big deal. And so looking at the receiver room as a whole, it's like you get that out of him. Like Jer'Michael Carter, Giovanni Gibson, Deion Burke should be the guys. Isaiah Satania up there as well. Elijah Thomas. I still feel like we're not talking about Zion Kearney enough, maybe. What does he bring to the table?
Good call.
What he brought in the back end of last year, I thought was not only encouraging, but necessary for him mentality-wise to be like, hey, I can do this.
The deep ball in the Navy game.
Yeah, like that. You could see it in his face. Like that was a set it, right? And so the last thing I'm going to say, Josh, and then if you have any other thoughts that you want to go down on the receiver room, the last thing I'm going to say is I think they filled out this receiver group with one primary objective in mind. What kind of tools in the toolbox does John Mateer need? Very similar to like Cam Ward with the Tennessee Titans are doing draft-wise. Like they're bringing in a lot of receiver bodies that fit roles or needs or like scenarios. Like when John Mateer's on the move, what does he need? He needs someone deep over the top. He needs kind of that chain check down guy, all this other. I like what they're doing with this receiver group. Yes, it's still relatively unproven, but I think that they just kind of went out and got some guys who can situationally be what John Mateer needs in that moment.
Yeah, no, I agree. It all kind of starts with Deion Burks. Deion Burks is healthy and is the number one guy that we all think he's capable of being. And we saw, at times last year when he was able to be out there. The rest of the room just kind of falls in line after him. It's really more you hate to put too much on one guy, but that's kind of how it feels for me. Like the room, if you told me Burks is healthy all year, I feel a lot better about it the other way. I think that's kind of obvious considering he's your top guy, but it just kind of the way it is with all those guys kind of being, like you said, a little unproven at this point. And as far as Carter, it's just basically you're looking for him to be a more consistent and just better version of JJ Hester, basically. They're very similar build. JJ Hester had moments where you're like, this guy could be really good, but he's never really did it consistently. Had a couple of drops in tough spots that hurt his playing time last year. Can he come in and basically be what we thought and maybe hoped he would be? I think that's kind of a little bit what you're looking for. So we'll see. But I like the pickup. And, Emmett Jones, again, all you could ask for after the way that position went last year with all the injuries, and it was just we were just begging every week of someone to step up, and it just never really happened. You added 5 guys. I mean, you added 5, plus not even including the guys you signed, Thomas and Mitchell. It's a totally different room. It's basically Deion Burks and then a totally different room outside of obviously the Kearneys and Carry On and Raggins. Those are your 2 guys. It's a totally different position basically. So different look at it. And you're hoping for, at least a couple of these guys to step up and be breakout stars for you. And then for Carter too, it always is, we kind of, I think, take it for granted sometimes. It always is hard to do the post-spring thing. Not being here for spring, does that put him behind? It's just hard. The number of guys we've seen come in the summer and make an immediate impact is relatively low. I mean, it happens, but it's harder. It's noticeably harder than the winter guys, both portal and high school. But we shall see. As far as the portal in general, we think it's over. Let me ask that real quick. Rip that Band-Aid off. Is this it? I mean, you imagine no more. I mean, the window's obviously been closed for almost a week now. Are you envisioning this is the end of the cycle?
I think this is it. Now, there's something that I want to talk about as like a overarching theme here before we kind of go down some different storylines and just talk some ball. We're done for now. The tricky part for me is we're going into the summer and this court case is out there floating, and I'm getting a ton of questions about it. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know all the answers, and I don't think anyone knows all the answers. I'm not even sure that the judge and the people going back and forth in the court case, I don't know that they know the answers either.
Yeah.
I think we're done, but kind of the tricky part of this is, okay, if we get into the summer and the 105 rule is not implemented for this season, which sounds very likely, from everything that I've been reading and trying to research on, Oklahoma could potentially grandfather in roster spots, which means potentially they can bring back some guys that had a roster spot previously. I don't know. Anyway, basically what I'm trying to say is from like a addition perspective, I think we're done. From like a roster change perspective, I mean, whether it's 105 or it's 115, I don't think we're done on that front, which makes all of this very tricky. So,
yeah. Good note. They're still over the number. That's where we kind of get to. They're over both just total number. They're over that 105 that Collin was referring to. And they're also, I believe, over the scholarship number. Am I correct in that? I think they are.
I think so. I think so.
Some guys are walk-ons. You don't realize they're walk-ons. NIL makes it a little more murky than it used to be. But there's probably, so like Collin, like you're saying, there probably is the chance that there's still a body or two that moves out. We'll keep an eye on that. But in general, like you said, the portal cycle from an addition standpoint looks like it's finished. They added 5 guys in the spring. Obviously, Jay not the headliner for obvious reasons, top running back in the portal. Jake Michael, Jer'Michael Carter, we just talked about, Ricky Lolohea, and then they needed a kicker and they got one. And Tate Sendell, who Collin brought up on the show last Thursday. We talked about that a little bit with Tom and James on Monday. So the cycle's done here. They added 5 guys. Did you feel like they did a good job? I guess, for lack of a better word. I mean, we said they need a tight end, and they didn't get one. We talked, we didn't stress it as much tight end, but we talked about cornerback as maybe being something that you wouldn't hate. Obviously, didn't add one here either. We talked about it a little bit last week. The possibility of maybe adding a corner. Didn't add there either. Kind of sum up the cycle. I guess we'll start with just this. What's the headline of the cycle for you? Is what they did or what they didn't do? I guess. Where does your mind go when I ask you this poor cycle? What's like the top headline for you from it with these 5 guys, Ott, Michael, Carter, Lolohea, and Sandell?
For me, the headline, honestly, is player retention. I mean, I don't think that they leave the spring with a ton of major losses. I mean, you had a little bit of turnover in the running back room, and I want to talk about this more in a second, but you go out and get Jaden Ott for what's already a really solid group, even with 2 exits. Keeping David Stone, to me, might arguably be the number one storyline for Oklahoma coming out of the spring.
Does he count as a portal? He almost counts as a portal pickup. He was in the portal.
I'll count him. I'll count him because, hey, we're sure talking about him if he's not in this group, right?
No doubt.
Think about how different our conversation would be if he did end up leaving. We are not in anywhere near as close to spirits right now here on the show. We're not just sitting here talking ball if David Stone had left. And the perception of the program is markedly different if they don't get that worked out.
Mm-hmm. for sure.
I count that as a win because I've seen this make the rounds on social media, but it's very much a sentiment that's shared by personnel folks that I talk to. Like, additions, they're obviously celebrated, but retention should be celebrated just as much as additions.
No doubt.
And I mean, we're talking about a 5-star defensive lineman from the state of Oklahoma who was being courted by massive brand names, Miami, Ohio State. And your ability to get that worked out, I think that for me, not only is the primary storyline, but it kind of encapsulates what really should be discussed here is Oklahoma. Yes, they got some really quality additions. And I want to talk about that more here in a second, but kicking it to you, like, your thoughts on that side of the spring window, whether it's retention, David Stone, just in general, Oklahoma kind of handling its own business before doing stuff elsewhere.
No doubt. It's a great point. And I think it speaks volumes to the retention ability, specifically on the defense, and then their belief in the guys they have, and also, the guys coming up, the way they've recruited at the high school level on the defensive side, that they added 3 defensive guys, winter and spring, in the portal. 3 guys, that's it. Obviously with Kendall Daniels, Marvin Jones, and then Ricky Lolohea in the spring. That's it. 3 guys. Everyone they've added in the portal, everyone else has been either offense or obviously special teams with a couple kickers and a punter. That kind of goes to show you right there what they did in terms of retaining their top talent. And then also, again, where they feel they just didn't, we float around a little bit of a cornerback maybe, but they obviously, Brent Venables and his staff felt comfortable, and let's put our resources into building up this offense. We're good on defense. We'll make a couple additions, but we're in good shape. And I think that should give fans, reason to be excited. I mean, 3 total guys on defense in the portal.
Yeah.
That is, I don't even know the word. I mean, it's kind of like that. That's a
it's
statement
nuts.
in itself almost. I mean, the fact that that's all you felt necessary to add, everything else is on offense and special teams. I think that's a little bit of a statement in and of itself right there. The fact that it's just 3 guys, a couple defensive line, one on the edge, one inside, and a linebacker who can play some cheetah for you. That's it. Boom. And the rest of it, we're good with what we've got. We're good with what we've recruited. We're good with what we've developed. That's a pretty good little, I think that makes you feel pretty confident about the direction, especially of the defense. I think most people felt confident anyway, but the fact that you could graduate off the guys they did, have a good year defensively, and it's like, no, we don't need to go crazy in the portal. A couple guys, but we're good. We're good with where we're at and what we have coming up through the ranks at the high school level. Because Brent Venables talked about that a bunch of times. Doesn't want to be reliant on the portal. He still believes, and some staffs and around the country have kind of shifted this mindset a little bit and have put less of an emphasis on the high school recruiting and more on the portal. That's not where Brent Venables is. He's been very consistent with that. I still believe the best way to build up a program and to build a contender is consistently doing it through the high school ranks. And hard to argue with that defensively right now when you only add 3 portal guys. That's shockingly low, I would guess, going around the country of other major programs. And maybe I'm way off, but if you went around, I feel like both sides of the ball having 3 offense or defense in one cycle is relatively rare, if I had to guess.
Yeah. Great notes, strong notes. And on that note, let's go back and forth here because to the question, did they address all their needs? I want to start with corner. I have thought more and more about what you said specifically the last time we talked about this. And I'm going to be honest, I am a little bit surprised that OU is sticking with the current setup because Eli Bowen, Gentry Williams, those should be your guys. Eli Bowen has been banged up this spring. We obviously know what Gentry Williams has been from an injury perspective over the last few years. Jacoby Johnson is first off the bench, and I think that they really like Jacoby Johnson. I think Jacoby Johnson is a high ceiling player.
Yeah.
But I would also say that maybe there were some points last year where it didn't go the way he wanted it to. And that coupled with the fact that your other depth options in that room are the guys that are kind of preventing them from adding at this point, those younger guys like Newcomb and Jordan and so on and so forth, Cortland Guillory, Malik Hawkins, the guys we've all talked about. Those are your depth guys, and those are the guys that you're choosing to lean on rather than adding a body. But I am now looking at it saying, if you're not going to add a body, are you comfortable with those guys stepping in to start a game against Ole Miss? You know, Brian Nelson from North Texas is a guy that got brought up. He's still out there. I was kind of surprised that they weren't mentioned as much for Julian Neal, a corner that went in from Stanford. You know, they've been recruiting guys at Stanford pretty heavily, it feels like. And, you know, Nelson or Julian Neal's 6'2", 200-pounder, like big dude, kind of felt like a complimentary frame to someone like Bowen. He's going to Arkansas, so he's in the SEC. Yeah, just I don't know. Are you feeling better, worse, or the same at corner, knowing that they are pretty much saying we're good, even with some guys that potentially could have made some sense being out there?
Yeah, I won't lie. I'm a little shaky. I like the room a lot. It's just more a health thing for me, especially. I mean, maybe this is coming off of last year where injuries were such a problem. Maybe it was an anomalous year. But the room, it feels like, a couple guys go down and you're really relying on young guys, and that might be okay. I mean, Eli Bowen did great as a freshman. That might be fine, but it also might be like, dang, I wish we had some veteran players in here when you're going against, some of these wide receiver cores in the SEC that are just loaded with NFL guys, depending on, whatever given week. I mean, I love Gentry Williams. I love Eli Bowen. Still think Jacoby Johnson has a lot of upside. In hindsight, his move to wide receiver was a bad move. In hindsight, I'm not.
It wasn't fair to him.
I'm acknowledging that it's in hindsight. At the time, it kind of felt like, maybe the need a receiver so bad, it probably would have been better off his development if he had just stayed on defense the whole year. Yeah. But I still think he's got a chance to be a really good corner. And then we talked about it. I like these young guys a lot, but are they ready? I don't know. I mean, who knows? Until you throw them out there, who knows? So I don't know. I mean, if you told me they're going to remain healthy, then I'd be like, okay, it'll be fine. But, Gentry Williams had a hard time staying on the field. Eli Bowen was just banged up literally in spring. I don't know. I mean, I think it's fair to be a little concerned. The rest of the defense, no worries at all, really. I mean, obviously you get a bunch of injuries anyway, you're going to be a little bit pressed, but you feel pretty darn good everywhere else. Corner, just I would have felt a little better with another body, for sure.
Yeah, it's just tough because cornerbacks, I do want to acknowledge, are expensive, and I think that I have to assume that, doing some educated guessing here, that the market just didn't make sense relative to the current setup. And I'm not using that as a justification point. What I'm more simply saying is, should they or should they have not spent? We're really only going to know once the season rolls around. And I mean, until then, it's something that, like I mentioned the last time on the show, I wonder if this specifically is something that we look back on as a, for better or worse, turning point for the cornerback group. Now, speaking of expensive, Josh Callaway, let's talk some tight ends, because could this cost Oklahoma in 2025? I'm getting some wordplay going here, but look, so Lance Mason, that was their guy. Jack Endries from Cal went in the portal. I have heard that the number he is receiving from Texas is, I don't want to specifically ballpark it. I have heard the relative number. Yeah. It is, I don't think anyone's missed the fact that Texas is about to spend $35 to $40 million on its roster going into this year.
Insane.
Which is nuts. Endries is certainly part of that. And then they looked at Lance Mason, and I'm just going to be honest, I think Wisconsin put together a pretty sizable deal, especially off the heels, kind of like I hinted at. They gave Tanner Koziel a pretty substantial deal or agreement. He went back in the portal, and they had money to spend. So, look, props to Wisconsin for saying, hey, this is a position we want to prioritize in our budget and making that move. Was that a mistake, Josh? Should they have forked over? Should they have pressed harder for other options? I mean, we haven't talked about the tight end room much since all this went down, but where are you at with that group with other guys headed elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's far and away the biggest question mark on the roster by far. I just have no clue who's going to be the guy. And I don't know if Lance Mason would have been slam dunk great, right? I don't know that. But it felt like, a given that they've got to add a tight end in the portal, especially after Devon Mitchell, is no longer with the program. And it's a position that I know Joe John Finley takes a lot of heat from the fan base, so I don't need to just pile on even further. But it's a position that has been bad, or at the best, underwhelming the last couple of years since Braden Willis was awesome. In 2022, that position has just not been good, or at least not what you need in the passing game specifically. And you just, you're looking at Will Huggins and maybe Carson Kent. I mean, Jaron Kanik is converted from defense. Like, it's just, I don't know how you could feel any sort of confidence that the tight end room is going to be a game changer for you in this upcoming season offensively as you try to turn this thing all around with Mateer and Arbuckle. So I don't know. I mean, it felt like they absolutely got to find someone. Jack Hendry seemed like a slam dunk. Obviously got really expensive. I get that. And then it felt like Lance Mason's another solid addition, good size, was productive last year, Missouri State. You can't lock him down. You lose him to Wisconsin. I don't know. And what's the future of this position too? I mean, after Devon, moves on, it's a bunch of older transfers, and then Trinae Washington, who's a freshman, who I, could develop into something. I thought Trinae was kind of underrated last year. We talked about that a couple times, but I don't know what the future of the position is either. I mean, Ryder Mix, looking way down the road. I mean, it's kind of like, it's not like there's some Devon Mitchell was kind of your beacon of hope. Like if the light turns on for him, that's an NFL tight end, and now he's gone. So it's like, it's not great now. And there's not anything obvious coming down the pike either. It's like, it's just, I don't know. It was, I think, the top need, and they added in the winter, obviously, with Kent and Locke and Huggins. But you go through spring, it's like maybe one more wouldn't hurt, especially after Devon moves on and you didn't add anything. It's going to easily be the biggest question going into the start of the season. And maybe one of these guys surprised us. Will Huggins certainly looks the part. Ben Arbuckle spoke very highly of him, and Carson Kent had a nice camp, I think, relatively speaking. But I don't know. I don't know how you could feel confident in that room right now. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
I think at the end of the day, when we talk about this tight end room, I think it really comes down to how much actual utilization is there of the tight end in whatever Oklahoma's offense will be. Because if it comes down to Will Huggins' ability to block and catch a couple passes on a release off the line of scrimmage, like, I think you're actually in decent shape.
Is he going to be able to block the edge rushers? That's like question.
And then we go down the rabbit hole of, are these players prepared to fill the specific roles that they're being brought in to fill? That's the thing, is we don't know the answer. It's one of those things where, like, a guy like Lance Mason, who was an All-American in the FCS level, one of the most productive receiving tight ends in the country, like, you at least have like a proof of concept, right?
Sure.
At the end of the day, I'm not sure that there is a true proof of concept with any of these tight ends, not just now, but like you mentioned, into the future. And so I think what Oklahoma basically said was, we would rather place our budget on the receiver position in Arbuckle's offense and make sure there is a plethora of options on the outside and in the slot, because that's what we feel is pretty much going to be the flow chart, right, of the structure. And look, they also told you that they want to run the football, right? Like, they would rather, instead of utilize the tight end potentially, and all of this is me guessing, go get Jaden Ott out of the blue as a want, not a need. Or Jaden Ott, I should say, excuse me. So yeah, man, I don't know. This is a very interesting spot that they're in at tight end. And I think, honestly, I'm not necessarily too worried about it now because, like I mentioned, I think it really just kind of comes down to what they're actually being asked to do. And if it's not much, then all right, like I get it. But I would say, kind of to your point, like the future layer is something that I still think that they have to figure out. So,
yeah.
All right, open board here to now that we've talked about the address their needs. Josh, like any specific storyline or individual player coming out of the spring that they brought in, Jaden Ott, Jake Michaela, Ricky Littlehan, that you've had some time to marinate, not just player-wise, but room-wise, like, okay, how does the running back room shake out behind Jaden Ott? What does he look like in this offense? Or anything else that has stood out to you now that we are at the back end of the spring window?
No, for sure. I think the obvious is how does Jaden Ott, how does it go? I mean, they ponied up for this guy. He's a guy that Jim Nagy identified, like you said, not really as a need, but as a want. This guy is just too good. If we can get him, we got to get him, sort of a thing. Is he what they envision he will be and that Oklahoma fans think he could be? Is he going to be that home run, this guy can change a game for you? Because they've kind of been missing that. The running back room has been pretty solid. I mean, it's not like it's been a problem. When was the last time you saw, honestly, I'm just, anecdotally, an 80-yard run by a running back, like just a boom touchdown out of nowhere? Like that hasn't really happened a lot. Jaden Ott's a guy who can do that for you, so yeah, that's fascinating to me. I'm excited to watch him play and looking forward to the fall. I mean, as far as the spring portal cycle, I think you made some nice additions to maybe, some depth pieces, maybe your starting kicker with Sandell, but Jaden Ott's the obvious in that the slam dunk, potentially game changer type of player, if he's what you think he could be. So I'm excited to see him, coming up this coming fall. And, is this offense, that's obviously the storyline with Arbuckle and Material, all the changes on offense. But Jaden Ott, it just feels like this is a guy who has a chance to be an awesome, awesome player for you. And the fact he can catch passes, they haven't really had that. I think that's going a little overlooked. But Jaden, he can get out and catch passes for you in a way that they haven't really had in a while. Maybe Eric Gray get out and catch some passes. That's probably the last guy. But even backing up before that, you're looking at what? I mean, Trey Sermon a little bit. Going back to like Joe Mixon. I mean, these are the guys that can get out and make big plays in the passing game for you. Jaden Ott can do that. So I'm fired up to see him. And it's a guy that, I think fans are going to fall in love with pretty quick. In that Michigan game in week 2 when he, goes for 3 tutties and over 100 yards or something, that's it, kind of what you're hoping for. I think that's realistic for him, that he could be a huge part of the offense and the team this year.
Yeah. So to further the previous retention point, I do want to bring up too, massive wins to not only keep Jaden Gibson, but Taylor Tatum in the fold as well. Yeah. Come the spring window, I would call that a massive win. But on that note, we're talking Jaden Ott, we're talking Taylor Tatum. You put me on the spot with the offensive line stuff the other day, so I'm going to put you on the spot and kind of play some tennis right back. Now that we're out of the spring, they have 2 backs exit. They keep Tatum. They add Jaden Ott. Who's your running back 2 going into next year?
I mean, there's a strong argument made, I think, for 2 guys, for Javonte Barnes and Xavier Robinson. I don't think Taylor Tatum's probably in that mix just yet. Okay. Barnes and X, it's tough. I mean, Barnes has been around and obviously has done some nice things, played pretty well last year whenever he was out there. Xavier Robinson, the way he finished the year, I think you have to go running back 2. I would say Xavier Robinson, tentatively. I mean, Xavier Robinson, the way he finished the year, and he's going into year 2, he's the guy that you're envisioning as kind of the future of that position. Him and Taylor Tatum both, but I would lean Xavier Robinson. I feel like he gives you a nice little compliment more so to what Jaden Ott brings as well. But you're still going to use Barnes. He's still going to be in the mix. I'd be shocked if Javonte Barnes isn't still, a guy who factors in. He's going to have a role. But I would lean Xavier Robinson. Before they got Jaden Ott, I think it's totally reasonable. You could argue Xavier Robinson was the most talented and best running back on the team. So That's where I would lean. About you?
I would tend to agree. I think that Barnes has the tenure stuff in his favor, right?
Sure.
But I think, especially after what Xavier Robinson showed you at the back end of last year, what in theory you're trying to do with someone like Jaden Ott, I feel like this sets up really well for Xavier Robinson to take that next step and have those fresh legs consistently and be just that downhill road grader that he can be. And I think Javonte Barnes, while similar in play style, I'm not sure he has as much of just like the sheer power that Xavier Robinson has. Some of those runs, like in the Mizzou game, it looked like a freight train with the ball, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I do find kind of interesting is like you come out of the spring window and we talk offensive line and wide receiver, and it's like, hey man, they're kind of setting it up to where they know who RB1 is. They're paying Jay not to be RB1.
Yeah.
You're really going to have to figure out who your guy is at RB2 because it not only has short-term but potentially long-term implications as well.
No, I mean, X was the top reason that they beat Alabama. I mean, I guess the defense overall, but I mean, I can't get past what he did in that Alabama game. He was phenomenal. Then we didn't really see him that much in the LSU game or in the bowl game. It perplexing. Yeah. So that's a main thing too with the running back room. I think DeMarco Murray's a good coach. He's a good recruiter, obviously. The talent in his room has always been great. If there's been a knock on him, it's been the rotations are weird and have been weird. I hope it's a little better. I hope maybe having a very clear number one in Jay Knott can make it a little more clear. Because, it's like when you got to the Bama game, you're wondering, where has Xavier Robinson been all year when they couldn't run the ball most of the season until later in the year? And then, where was Xavier Robinson really after that Bama game? It just roll with your best guys, roll with your best guys. That's what I'd like to see. And hopefully Jay not being a clear number one, I think makes that maybe a little easier, kind of after that. But a solid cycle. They probably need a tight end. Maybe could use a corner, but they, got some nice pickups. Jay Knott's one of the bigger splash gets in the entire sport in the cycle. So I think overall, did some good things, and we'll see where they go from here. Going to be an interesting summer, and looking forward to fall camp. Start to shake this thing out a little bit. Be here before it's already into May. So here we go. Any final thoughts on spring portal before we get done with we're done with portal stuff seemingly for a while?
I think that's it, and I'm ready to be done. Right? Like ready for it to be over. So
Collin crushed the portal stuff. Still obviously have a lot of summer recruiting and all that good stuff. It was really starting to get back up and running here over the course of May, and then obviously into the summer. June got camps and a bunch of stuff coming up. So make sure to subscribe. Oklahoma.247sports.com, and obviously big media days and fall camp. All that be right around the corner. So lots of team intel and coverage and all that good stuff here before you know it, as you're ready to get rolling into year 2 in the SEC. So that's it for now. Again, Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma.247sports.com. Join along, subscribe, become a VIP member, all that good stuff. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway, signing off for now. We'll see you next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.